So then, we are back with more understandings from the Renewed Covenant from the Aramaic English translation of the Word. This translation is from the original documents of the prophets of Israel, prophets of old, and they gave us many information regarding then the time of the end and its relation with our events. And then as we prepare ourselves understanding the holy prophecies, then we can make plans based upon these understandings from heaven, and then helping the other people, friends, to line up themselves, because then they understand what the stock market is going to be like. They have an idea then how to invest their resources, understanding this new partner of the world coming in. And many studies indicate of the many resources available in China for improvement and also for investment. And since they are going to be taking the leading of the world's market in the very near future, we understand also the investments of many countries and individuals while they are then preparing their future and then securing a position where they can be sure their investments are going to be properly spent and invested. In terms of then the relations with the government and the people, there are many countries in the world going through lots of changes and political reforms. As it was pointed out in a previous video, we English-speaking people, we always were prone of being people of listening to Great Britain's movement of political government and how they do their reforms, and then the other nations, English-speaking people, would be obviously then copying their reforms. So then we would act as unison, as then the English-speaking countries are then lining up themselves for this time of the end. And then obviously in terms of our investments overseas, then the euro, very important, also encouraging the people to get out of the euro, because it's truly a defeated monetary system. That's no question about it, because the prophet Daniel did explain at the end countries would try to come together. What he was trying to say, as a statesperson, he was a politician. Many people, they confuse the understandings of the prophet Daniel as being solely related with Yahweh's prophecy and his kingdom. But truly, he was a dual person doing both of them at the same time. If we study the work of Daniel the prophet, you find him as a statesperson. He was trained in the Chaldean language and their culture. He was very aware of with the time of the Chaldeans' rule. He was given then a copy of Yirmiyahu's Megillah, so then obviously later when he perceived that the time was coming to an end, he was then making a reference of the Megillah from the time of Yirmiyahu, and then he did understand that the 70 years in captivity was then ending. So then it was a great time of transition, where then the people of Israel would return to the land. Some of them would stay, obviously, and there was a time of a big reform. And then when later the Medo-Persians came, then Daniel the prophet, yet a statesperson, remained in position. So these give us a very important understanding of the stability and the rock-solid understanding of the holy prophecies. So then nations in the future would understand what the prophet Daniel, as a position of a statesperson or a politician, is then given to the future politicians how they should behave. Obviously, they are not going to copy what he did in person, but in terms of stateship, his person, when he was then given stateship responsibility, he was then a person very, very prominent. And he said as a statesperson, because then Yahweh, the true creator, gave him the understanding of the dream. He was speaking of stateship. Many countries would be then in charge of a particular time in history, and then he would be giving them the significance of those. And until the end came, he was then speaking at the very end, prior of the striking of the rock, meaning then the return of the Messiah to pick up his people. Then he was then giving us the understanding of the end time politics. So it's very interesting, because then you begin a very unique study of stateship, himself being the very leader of this end of time prophecy regarding then secular. Because as we understand, there are areas of Daniel that you understand layers of the divine guidance, and then the pure secular layer. So then Daniel, he ended his statespersonship as then a person speaking secularly, except when the rock came, and then symbolizing then the Messiah return. So then later, when we begin to study his prophecies, we have then a couple of layers of understanding, as himself being also a person speaking from the divine, also then secularly. And he said very precisely at the end, the kingdoms or countries would try to come together and adhere to each other. He was speaking of tradeship. But these tradeship has a relation with the monetary system. Try to understand the concept of Prophet Daniel. He was speaking countries coming together under the same monetary system. However, we find in Yirmiyahu the divine understanding of it. What then Daniel the prophet was explaining was a monetary system, that it would come together to form a group, and then this group would have a certain understanding of heaven. Try to understand the concept. You are speaking then trade, and the aim of this unison money system was then to induce the people to believe a false understanding of heaven, thus the time of deceit. But we understand the time of deceit has ended in 2009, per the time of prophecy. However, remained the top layer of the 2000 years, and is purely related with Gentiles' rulership, secular rulership. So then you begin to link up what it means of heaven's understanding and then secular understanding. So then when you read Yirmiyahu, then you find the gap of time where his people then would return and resume the services, while then the heathens would also be refurbishing. So both of them would experience the mighty hand of Yahweh as precisely as the prophet Yirmiyahu spoke. Quite interesting times we're living in. So the situation in Europe was then, they came together and they tried to come with a popular understanding of a monetary system, but relating during the time where then the earth was under the seat. They thought at best having these, as then many would say, God would be leading them to do it. But then Daniel, precisely he was speaking during the time where then only the secular people would try to come together under a monetary system, and then they would try to reflect their own works as if it would come from heaven. And those were concocted during the time of the deceit. Try to understand, from 2009 and onwards, then the time of deceit has ended. A lot of people from Yahweh then began to speak up regarding then the time of the ending of the time of the Gentiles. And many people reliable and studied in this subject can testify that it was a huge spike of information around 2009. So the transitional time began to be very, very evident. There were obviously lots of fights going on and information in and out, but then as the time goes on, then the transition becomes more evident, and then people are more aware of it. So what went on then in Europe, trying to have this monetary system, then did not work, as precisely as statesperson Daniel spoke, and he prophesied. Because then if you understand the Tower of Babel, they began to kind of have a copy of what Nimrod tried to do, unifying the people and then reaching heaven, meaning the deceit. It was a pure deceit. So then we understand the harmony that must be taking place, so then people are lined up with a new trade system coming. And they can get the best out of the system for their own benefit. So then it makes more sense. However, we are at the time living during the refurbishment or the restoration from an absolutely purely neutral viewpoint. If you understand the position of China, even though they have their own political system, they don't impose the political system in any country other than establishing trade, purely trade. So then the situation regarding then the area and the proximity of China, for instance, some of them Taiwan and some of the islands of the south, those are going to be minute problems. Absolutely minute. Because there is so much that China should be more aware of and should prepare themselves for global trade. And then as an act of their forbearing, they can simply either let those people do their trade with them with more liberty on their behalf, because they have the entire world system yet to synchronize with their own, without forcing them, merely because they were wise on their trades, and they were chosen for this end of time. So then our views are much more clearer from this time on. So then people and individuals can do their own plans, because the investment should be obviously in the country where they are at, but in terms of international, they should be focusing in what China then is having plans for the future. Because as the word has indicated, the third part of the ships, it is stating that any nation in the world would be trading with her, or with the country, China. There's a tremendous amount of trade around the world linked up with them. They're going to experience a huge expansion of their software, computers, and the way of evaluating trade is going to come from China. It's a brand new market of how to invest, how to maintain, and how to withdraw your resources from a system, computerized obviously, but then they're going to lead the world's market. It does not mean they're going to take over the world, but it does mean the countries doing trade with her honestly, then they are going to present a trade system very inviting. So then for the benefit of the countries dealing with them, then they can adjust themselves for this huge new market. So it truly helps the other countries of doing their own plans, and much more relieved, because whatsoever they have in mind in terms of the world's trade, they understand the system. Thus the time of rebuilding. So then when Daniel the prophet was speaking, we understand he was speaking as a politician of his time, plus the divine wisdom of the future. And he was around doing his government, what was it, around 2,500 years ago? Very wise, huh? But then Yirmiyahu is giving us then a very important portion, because from his prophecies from the 61st chapter until the 66th chapter gives you then the time of the end in absolutely precision. But you have to understand how to read it. You find layers related with the earth system, secular, and you find understandings related obviously with the divine from the time of the Torah. So then the spring and autumn feasts and their significance are utmost important for a person to develop the perception of how to read those prophecies. It does not mean a person will be bound by them, but it means the development of these world's system of the future depends upon the understanding of the prophecies regarding the divine guidance. It's very intricate, but this is the unique area of the Hebraic language, the Hebraic writing, the Hebraic portion in relation with heaven. So from the 61st chapter, then you find until the 66th, the portion of the time of the end. And if you want a clue of what's going to be like when the earth then is renewed, then read the 66th chapter. So then when you begin to understand Yirmiyahu's prophecy from the 61st and then onwards, then you understand what the renewed covenant revelation is speaking of. And both of them are making a reference of Leviticus, the 23rd chapter. So you find then every person is studying the prophecies pointing back to the Torah. You find the 23rd chapter of Leviticus from the 23rd verse until the 44th. That's the autumn feast, and we are in autumn. We are understanding the autumn feast. So then the Messiah in the future, he is returning at this time of the year. The sound of the shofar, meaning the autumn feast. But we as Gentiles, we understand not the feasts themselves, but the significance of the shadow prophetic understandings of the events. However, the elect, they are then involved also with the feasts themselves. That's why when they rebuilt their cities and resume the second services, then in the future they're going to receive a second anointing, while then observing every feast as per then the instructions. While the Gentiles, they resume their work. They don't have to be concerned with those, other than the prophetic shadows, as then Shaliach Shaul pointed in Hebrews 10. The significance and the shadows understanding we should be very aware of. And those obviously wanting to enjoy the feast, they would report at the cities or the nearby city where they can be part of. So then rather than going to Jerusalem the first, second, and third times of the year, if you are truly a devout person, then you have the representative in your country, in your city. That's the representative of Jerusalem. And at some point then there are so many cities already being thought of, and then in the future these places they're going to be praying for Jerusalem, and then Jerusalem is going to be rebuilt. Thus then the great temple then also rebuilt. But there are the steps of formation before. And the world then, they are not focusing on temple, they are not focusing on cities. At the moment they are focusing on understanding then the new partner, while then understanding the rest of it. Because it's not realistic for people involved and engaged in this world system and thinking of heaven without understanding the everyday first. No, first they understand the everyday and what's coming. Then they shift it to the divine. Secularly speaking. Then for those that have a high priority on the divine first, then you do the reverse. But the reverse requires then the understanding of the cities. The desire of reporting to the city representative of Jerusalem, so then you can understand more of the future. Thus then you find the Hebraic people in their camps or in their cities as per the design of Moses. Then you have that a person functioning in prophecy, word of wisdom, word of knowledge, healing, miracle, tongues, interpretation of tongues, discerning of spirits. So then you report as much as you want to those cities, and that's in fact where you should bring your tithes. Your 10%. If you are a devout person and you want to do what Yahweh told you to do, as if you consider yourself as part of the family, then you can give your 10% during the time of the autumn, or the autumn feast, Feast of Sukkah, Tabernacle. You simply bring what you have as a tithe and give to the camp. That's where you should tithe, because you receive spiritual understandings from heaven via those cities. Does it mean that then the Gentiles themselves should not congregate? They should congregate. But there are some guidelines best for them of only sharing their experiences. Only sharing their experiences. And then resume their daily lives. There is a lot going on, lots of economical situations, a lot of adjustments, because we are during the time of a big transition. And Yahweh, the true Creator, has provided for His people and also, amazingly, for the Gentiles. He caught even myself by this huge surprise. I thought He would not do this for the Gentiles. I thought He's going to do this only for His own. But He has taken care of them both. And the section of it given this precise understanding is then even the heathens or then the Gentiles would observe with their own eyes the mighty works of Yahweh. And boy, He did it. Please stay tuned. Much more coming up.